Charlie Clark is a longtime journalist and historian in the Washington, D.C. area, who writes weekly for Our Man in Arlington column in the Falls Church News Press. He has written 2 books, Arlington County Chronicles and Hidden History of Arlington County, both published by History Press. He's a frequent contributor to the Arlington Historical Magazine. In July 2019, he retired as senior correspondent for the Government Executive Media Group, part of Atlantic Media. He previously has worked as an editor and writer for the Washington Post, the Congressional Quarterly, National Journal, Times Life Books, Tax Analysis, and Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges. And he has an upcoming book coming out next year, George Washington Parke's Kurt Augustus, and that will be published next year by McFarland Books. Anyway, I've said enough about Charlie. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Charlie, to tell us about the transportation in the last century.
Okay. So let's see, I'd like to expand this. Now let's see. Well, let's see. I'm sorry, I'm trying to move.
Either click the book or the podium little icon down there. Either one should expand it.
Let's see.
Just select play from beginning up on the upper left.
Yeah,
okay,
okay, that'll do it. Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Okay,
Chris.
thanks.
Yeah.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody, and I'm delighted to be here and to be sharing digital streaming space with you all. It gives me a real feeling of togetherness. But we're going to talk today about some transportation tales in the past century in Arlington and in the region, and we're going to talk a little bit about how the pandemic might change what has really been a tale of domination by the automobile. I first wanted to get some of the self-promotion out of the way. This is a shot of my collection of books on Arlington. Has a little bit of Alexandria in it, and it's sort of a partial collection there. I have even more in a separate place. And then this is my granddaughter, Caroline, being ruthlessly exploited as child labor in the aisles of Costco with my 2 books on Arlington. And then finally, this is what I did last year with cooperation with the Arlington Historical Society, which is the interactive story map that shows you in commemoration of Arlington taking its name from Alexandria County back in 1920. This is a collection of about 120 photos of buildings, homes, storefronts, infrastructure that you would see if you were walking the streets of Arlington in 1920. And you can zoom in on the good thing about it. You don't just see the pictures, you see the location of it. So that you can find at the arlingtonhistoricalsociety.org website. So before our pivotal year of 1920, Arlington, like many places around the country, relied on transportation by horseback and horse and buggy. And in the Potomac River, you had schooner ships and later steamers that would come out of the Georgetown port and stop sometimes at Arlington House and the Port of Alexandria. And then you also had the early railroad. The first one was the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, which got started in 1848, and it sort of lapsed in 1867. So what you get in the latter decade of the 19th century are the proliferation of railroad companies, industrialists investing in them, that set up trains for passengers and cargo, but also the electric trolley cars. And this is a shot of the upper right is the Lacey Car Barn stop, which is at North Glebe Road and Fairfax Drive right near the entrance to I-66. This is taken around, this got started in 1896, and it was the sort of the main shop of storage and repairs and the office of the Arlington and Falls Church Railway. So you also had the Great Falls and Old Dominion Railway, and you had the Washington and Old Dominion Railway. And two of the biggest entrepreneurs who helped start these long lines were the owner of the Washington Post, John McLean, and the senator from West Virginia, Steve Elkins. And at one point, Arlington had 64 trolley stops in 4 lines. And this one on the left, lower left, is taken in Clarendon, and it looks like it's pre-World War I if you're judging by the +4 pants and the long skirts that the women are wearing. And one of the pleasures of the Washington, the Dominion and Great Falls line was that you would take people all the way out to Great Falls, where the entrepreneurs set up picnic areas and other entertainment. And Toby McIntosh, who's an Arlington writer, fed me one anecdote about, you know, this trolley line out to Great Falls, of course, was segregated. There was also like a colored waiting room in the Rosslyn office. And in 1921, there was an African-American gentleman named Theodore Harris who refused to move into the colored section of the trolley car. And he ended up pulling out a knife when the enforcers tried to accost him, and he was arrested and ended up in the Arlington County Jail. So the trains that continued in Arlington for the next few decades, of course, they carried cargo and crops from the way out in the Shenandoah Valley into town, and the major lines also came over the Long Bridge of the Potomac, which the Long Bridge itself goes back to 1809. It was actually, the site was selected by Thomas Jefferson and George Washington Parke Custis. But in 1904, it was rebuilt as a railroad bridge, and the railroad lines would come from downtown into what today is Crystal City and Potomac Yards. That was the area was called Arlington Junction. And then you had the other W&OD path going roughly along Wilson Boulevard. We'll get to more on that in a second. And of course, in the Arlington Junction area, you eventually had the Richmond and Fredericksburg and Potomac Railroad, and then today's CSX, which is Consolidated Rail. And of course, the same tracks are used by Amtrak, which got going in May of 1971. But this is a shot taken, I'm pretty sure it's from Lee Highway in 1920. And what's interesting is you see cars, and you see the railroad cars, and you see horseback there. This is 20 years later, also around Lee Highway in the Rosslyn area, and again, more modern railway and trucks right during the, probably part of the war effort. And then finally today, the railroads basically faded around the early 1940s. There was one of them, because of the war effort, they asked it to resume passenger trips for another 7 years or so. But mostly by the early 40s, it was done. And if you want to today go see one of the Washington Old Dominion Railway cars, you can find it at Bluemont Park. It's open on weekends for tours, and it's nice to get a three-dimensional view of what really, you know, in the 19th and early 20th century was the internet of its day. I mean, railroads were pretty transformational for the country. And I think it's also interesting that Bluemont Park and playing field, which where we think of as Little League and tennis courts, was really named for Bluemont. It's called Bluemont Junction as a train stop, but it was named for the town of Bluemont, which is way out in the Shenandoah area. So, but the real story of the last century in our Arlington and greater Northern Virginia area would be the infatuation with the automobile. And I have some statistics from automotive news. In 1918, one of 13 American families owned a car, but 10 years later, 4 out of 5 Americans owned one, which went from 8 million cars to 23 million in that decade. So it's really no coincidence that 1920 to 23 was about the time that Key Bridge was built, replacing the old aqueduct bridge to make car access to the district easier. And this picture of leisure time car racing was taken around that time too, is situated in Jackson City, which was near where the 14th Street Bridge hits Virginia now. Jackson City was a planned community, goes back to the 1830s, and President Andrew Jackson was there to lay the cornerstone and to endorse it, but it never really caught on, and it became kind of a den of iniquity in the latter 19th and early 20th century, as did Rosslyn, with brothels and gambling saloons. So it's interesting that this site also was near where the Arlington Beach was, and then later, as we'll see, the 14th Street Bridge. So then one of the major thoroughfares that was constructed in our area to accommodate these cars was the George Washington Memorial Parkway, which was begun in 1928 and took 4 years for the initial parts of it to be completed. And it was in time to honor the 200th birthday of George Washington. And I picked this picture because it shows you how it changed the landscape. And these were lent to me by Gail Raymond. Gail owns a home in the Bellevue Forest neighborhood called Glenmore, which she has nicknamed the Glass House, or others called it that, I guess. And to the left is a picture of the view from her deck. I'm guessing that's the 1920s or maybe around the end of World War I. And before the parkway is built. And then that picture to the right was taken the last month by Gail, and that shows you her new view at the parkway. The parkway, the first ceremonial drive on it was taken by President Herbert Hoover, who led us a party of 12 cars across the brand new Memorial Bridge in 1932. And the parkway then could take you all the way out to Mount Vernon. And the section between the Memorial Bridge and the Maryland side through McLean had not been built yet, and that would take until 1962. And here's a shot of some of that construction there. When I was a kid hanging out around the Gulf Branch, we would walk down to the river and just be awed at that tall GW Parkway trestle. So the other thing that happens in the early 1930s is that Arlington gets this new form of county manager government, and they take on this Herculean task of renaming the streets. And the streets, as they had evolved, were very duplicative and vague and not organized. And so that's where we got the grid that we have today, where you have the 1-syllable, 2-syllable, and 3-syllable streets grouped alphabetically, east to west, and then you have all the numbered streets on either side of Arlington Boulevard, north to south. Now, here's one of the major breakthroughs for thoroughfares in the area would be Shirley Highway. And it's one of the few highways named for a bureaucrat, which I think is great. Henry G. Shirley was the head of the Virginia Highways Department. And he okayed this project that we grew up calling it 95 and later I-395. But he died, sadly, in July of 1941 when the project was just getting going. So they named it for him. And the construction in the Arlington section was done by October of 1943, and then the rest of it by October of 1944. During, as part of the war effort, a lot of people commuting to the brand newly opened Pentagon. Now, this is, I thought, was a fun shot. It's a multimodal glimpse of Arlington celebrating the centennial of retrocession, which is 1846 to 1946. And that's when Arlington and Alexandria, together as Alexandria County, separated from the District of Columbia after they've been part of it since 1801. And so they had horseback riders' cars. And to your right of that picture, you can see one of the old trolley stops. I thought was interesting. So now, this is right around the end of the 40s. You get the construction of what today is informally known as the 14th Street Bridge. At the time, that was the name of one of the spans. Well, guess what? This is a sort of a trick question there. What is the formal name of the 14th Street Bridge? Well, there are actually 5 spans now. You have, part of it really is the long bridge, which is railroad only. And then you have a span named for the Maréchal Rochambeau, who was the French military officer who came over in 1780 and helped George Washington win the Revolution, and famously marched from Rhode Island down to Yorktown, Virginia, crossing the Potomac. You have a span named for George Mason, and you have a span named for Arlen D. Williams, and he was the hero of the tragic event, the crash of the Air Florida flight in January of 1982. I remember when that happened. I was working in Alexandria, and Arlen D. Williams was a passenger who was suddenly thrust into the freezing waters of the Potomac, and he saved other drowning passengers, but he himself perished. So they named that span of the bridge for him. And then finally, in 1983, they named another span for Charles Fenwick, whose house is right here in my East Falls Church neighborhood. It's a historic house. He was a former state delegate and state senator, and he was a rector of the University of Virginia. And they named the span for him because when he was head of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority.
Hey,
So,
hey, Charlie,
yeah.
I hate to break in. If you can, I know at least one other person is not able to see the screen share. I know I have a second device that is not showing up. Maybe if you can just stop it and then share it again, see if that helps matters.
Let's see. Is that any better?
I mean, well, hopefully. I just thought we'd just put it up again, go through the process. So we'll see if that corrects things for people.
Okay, let me know. I can try again later, but
yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Now I can't advance it. Yeah, here we go. Start from beginning. All right, I'm going to catch up here. Okay. Now, you can't talk about our transportation area without talking about buses, and they're important today, and they were important in the 40s and 50s. This, of course, is a shot showing buses and trolley cars in Rosslyn Circle with the old hot shops there, which is now, of course, the Marriott Hotel. And the buses had a complicated history in Arlington. It was, and Northern Virginia was really looped into the DC Transit network, which had been owned in the 40s and 50s by a Lewis Wolfson, a private entrepreneur. And there was a big strike in 1955. And so Congress stepped in and revoked his franchise. And then came the entrepreneur, O'Roy Chalk. And Congress authorized him to take over the DC Transit service. So you might remember he had his car barn right there at the exit of Key Bridge in Georgetown, which is still there. It's part of the Georgetown University offices now. But so Chalk was required to repaint the buses and modernize them and come up with standardized colors. And they became a familiar sight. You know, I remember there was also private bus services in our area. In the African-American community, the Hicks family on Lee Highway had a private service, as well as the R.L. May Company along Columbia Pike in Barcroft. And, you know, for the African-American community, they, for decades were not permitted to go to the same stores and other public areas as whites. So they depended on these bus services to get downtown. I mean, they couldn't even use Arlington Hospital, for example. So many African Americans were born down in DC, even though they may have lived in Arlington. And then I remember the bus services when I was growing up over by Chain Bridge. We had African-American housekeepers who lived in the district, and they had to come over, take 2 or 3 different transfers on their buses to come to our house. And Congress finally got a little fed up with Roy Chalk that he was starting to incur debts and operating at a loss. So in 1973, Congress stepped in again and took it over, and that's what set up with the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, and it was the beginnings of Metro. All right, so this is really where we ended up in our hometown, is a huge car dependency in the 50s. This is the Pentagon, obviously, and it just, I think it was a pretty dramatic display of where, how much land cars take up, not to mention the pollution, which is not something that people were as conscious of then. But here's where we need to introduce the notion that it was pretty obvious by now in the 50s that there needed to be regional planning, intergovernmental planning too. So you get in 1957, you get the creation of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, COG. In 1958, you get the Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority, which we'll hear from a little bit. You get in 1964, the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. In 1967, you get the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. And in 1968, you get the Northern Virginia Regional Planning Commission. Now, they would rely on the constitutionally protected tool called eminent domain. And I remember when I was a kid having this explained to me by my father when we were driving on the old Glebe Road. Glebe Road back in the 50s and early 60s was, I'm talking about North Glebe over by Williamsburg Boulevard and Walker Chapel, was a 2-lane road, and it didn't even have sidewalks. It had, just tree roots that you would step over. And so the county, backed by the state, came in because they wanted to free up the commuter thoroughfare into the district. Required all the homeowners along that stretch of Glebe Road to give up a slice of their front yards to widen the road. And this picture you see on the left is at the intersection of Glebe Road and Williamsburg Boulevard. And the it's a modern picture. I don't want to cheat here, but I took this picture just last month, but there happened to be construction there for drainage and sewer pipes. But the house there is a historic house, Birchland, and then it was built, the later version, by the Weaver family, the hardware family from Georgetown. And it was bought in 1960 by the Page family. And I talked to Mrs. Page, and she talked to me about how her husband, when they were negotiating with the county about how much of their front yard they were going to have sliced off to widen Glebe, that the county agreed to help them build that stone wall, which is still there to the left. And then 10 years later, the county furthered the ease of the commuters by building New Glebe Road. And it was on the opposite side of Walker Chapel from the old Glebe Road, which is still there and called Old Glebe Road. And that was a modern 4-lane road that takes you all the way down to Chain Bridge. And it was cut out of woods. St. Peter's Church had already been built there in '65. And the Chain Bridge Forest subdivision was built there. So we get another bridge that a lot of us use all the time, was the Theodore Roosevelt Bridge. And it was in the planning stages since about 1952, but it finally, the construction finished in June 1964. And this is a later shot. It seems to be taken at an odd time of day when there's very little traffic. But you can see the Kennedy Center, and you can see Key Bridge. And they had some debates over exactly what parts of Roosevelt Island the bridge would pass over and where it would land. It was precisely in Virginia. And of course, this is before I-66, so you accessed it on the Spout Run and the GW Parkway. Now, no presentation would be complete without a discussion of the Capital Beltway. And I'd be interested in, if I could see a show of hands, which I can't, but how many of you know that the original name for the Capital Beltway was going to be the Washington Circumferential Highway, which doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. But it was officially renamed in June of 1960 as the Capital Beltway. And it had been on the drawing board, of course, since the early 50s, but it was finally approved in 1955 under President Eisenhower in the interstate highway system. It was 66 miles, originally cost $189 million, and it also allowed construction of the American Legion Bridge on the Fairfax to Montgomery County connection over the Potomac, and then in Alexandria, the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. They were both built in the late 50s. The Legion opened in 62, Woodrow Wilson Bridge opened in 61. And, you know, the Beltway really drove and helped encourage a lot of the movement of middle-class people out of the district into the suburbs, where they wanted land and single detached homes and lots of new subdivisions. And the price of land, I read, in Fairfax County near the Beltway shot up from $1,900 an acre in 1951 to $16,700 an acre just in 1964. That's a 779% increase, they calculated. And the Beltway was finally dedicated in August of 1964 when the governor of Maryland, J. Millard Tawes, cut the ribbon at the New Hampshire Avenue entrance in Williamsburg, in Montgomery County. And then I have a personal memory of the importance of the Beltway. Maybe you'll recall that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. Well, the next day, April 5th, my 9th grade class at Williamsburg Junior High took a long-planned bus trip to New York City for the day. And so when we were returning home that night, Saturday night, it became clear to the driver, and this is the day before cell phones, that the downtown DC was on fire, that there were protest riots. So instead of the planned route of cutting through Route 50 New York Avenue and into Arlington, our return home was delayed because the driver had to go all the way around the Capital Beltway. Now, you can't understand how we used to get around in our area and all over the country without remembering the hitchhiker. And I don't know whether young people are aware how common it was to hitchhike. You know, of course, it goes back to the 1920s or so. My father hitchhiked across the country when he finished high school in like 1939. But I did a lot of it myself in 1970, 71. And we used to get on the, if we wanted to go north, we would have somebody drop us off at the Falls Hill Road entrance to the Beltway in McLean. And if we wanted to go south, this is before there was an I-66, we would be dropped off at the South Glebe Road entrance to 95. And of course, by the 80s or 90s or so, it was just a lot less common. I think there was a lot of fear of crime, and it just was no longer in people's lifestyle. Okay, so let's talk about I-66. You know, again, it was also on the drawing board since the 1950s, and it had been built from Gainesville to Centerville in Fairfax as early as 1961. It was, I recall, a lot of resistance from Arlingtonians. Even in as early as 1964, I once saw a local newspaper where they were talking about there's a meeting tonight to block I-66. And the original plans to cut through Arlington were, it would have been like a 12-lane highway with chain link fence surrounding it and no sound walls. And so what happened during, as the protest lifestyle sort of gained traction, Congress also passed the National Environmental Policy Act in 1970, and that required environmental impact statements. So that sort of changed the calculation. The state and the feds and Arlington had begun confiscating property in the planned bed route for I-66 as of 1966. And a lot of the people I grew up with who lived along that, it's roughly where Fairfax Drive used to be between Glebe Road and Falls Church. And they have vivid memories of learning. One guy I know learned that his house was being confiscated by the state the same day they learned that their son had been killed in Vietnam. It was a real turning point for them, and people had to change schools and make deals with the state to make sure they got the best price. And then there was a lot of protests to try and block I-66. It went on into the 70s. There was a group called the Arlington Coalition on Transportation. It was led by Jim and Amelia Govan, whom I interviewed years ago, and they've done an oral history too. And finally, it went to court, and it was finally settled in 1977 with the Coleman report, Transportation Secretary William Coleman, where they finally came up with a design that people decided they could live with. And these are pictures I recently published in the Arlington Historical Magazine, thanks to Bob Connolly, a friend, showing how some of the houses that were in the path of 66 were put on trailers and moved. And of course, 66 has continued to be controversial in the 80s, 90s. You know, the people in Fairfax and Prince William counties always want it to be widened more, so they want less traffic and quick access to the district. That's changed a little bit now that there's a lot of employment out in the Dulles corridor with the tech sector, so there's people coming in the opposite direction more than there used to be. And then, of course, now for the last year or two, we've had this dynamic tolling where you have to pay. If you're willing to pay more, you can enter the I-66, but during the rush hour traffic. Okay, so this is the road not taken for our region. Maybe some of you recall having heard about the Three Sisters Bridge. It never existed, but it was discussed from the 50s on into the 70s, and it would have gone but right over Spout Run Parkway to the west of Key Bridge, over to Georgetown, and through. It would connect, I guess, with the Whitehurst Freeway. And Congressman Joel Broyhill was in favor of it. So was State Senator William Spong, and so was a national leader, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, William Natcher of Kentucky. And he held up funds for Metro, trying to get approval for the Three Sisters Bridge. There were protests on the out by the Potomac, and the Arlington County Board objected. Thomas Richards said it would mean the loss of much of the beautiful Spout Run Parkway and would mar the beauty of Potomac Palisades. So it was finally abandoned when they agreed to build I-66. So. All right, so Metro, you can imagine before there was a Metro, how disruptive the construction would have been. But if you lived in those neighborhoods, but it was on the drawing board again since the 1950s. The Arlington County Board voted to commit to its share of it in 1963, and Congressman Broyhill was in favor of that. And you got to give credit to the Arlington officials, County Manager Bert Johnson and Transportation Director Clifton Stoneberger. And then a little bit later, you had Hank Halmy, who was the Public Works Director. And they all negotiated with WMATA, which originally wanted to run the Metro, as some of you all probably remember, down the middle of I-66. And the Arlington officials were looking at the then kind of economically depressed areas along Wilson Boulevard and Clarendon Courthouse and Upper Rosslyn, and they negotiated to get what became the R&B corridor and to run the Metro through these commercial and residential areas a few hundred yards from I-66, which enabled all sorts of development, very cheap land for developers, and it has it's really changed the Arlington social scene too in later years. The other thing about Metro is that at one point there was a talk. They have 11 stops at Arlington. The last one added was Arlington Cemetery. But at one point there was talk on the drawing board of having a Columbia Pike line, perhaps a blue line that would go out to Annandale. But it was decided that would be too expensive and too disruptive. Though there is a kind of a spur tunnel at the Pentagon Station that could have been used for that. And of course, there's still talk of having a new tunnel under the Potomac to ease the crowding of the Blue Line, but that's way in the future. There's one more anecdote I like to tell about Metro, and it's been studying the subject of radio talk shows, is the myth about the Georgetown Metro. There was always a rumor that the hoity-toity upper crust citizens of Georgetown blocked the placement of a Metro stop there because they didn't want the riffraff coming into their fair community. And many of y'all probably remember the movie called, let's see, is it Kevin Costner thriller movie, Don't Look Now. I can't remember it. Anyway, it had a scene where the people are being chased and they exit in the Georgetown Metro, and all the locals laughed at that scene. But the researchers have kind of debunked this myth. They say that first of all, Metro was built with federal workers in mind, and there weren't that many federal workers in Georgetown. There's construction in Georgetown would have been really disruptive. A lot of it is uphill. And finally, just to loop, engineering-wise, geologically, to loop the underground tunnel of the river out to Georgetown was just not really very practical. So it never happened. Now, you remember when we left off the railroad, W&OD kind of fading away in the 1940s. So in the 70s is when the rails to trails movement got started. And it's interesting that this is, when the environmental consciousness is rising, and it was a national movement. And according to Rails to Trails, the organization, there are now 2,000 former railroad tracks that are now paths for bicyclists and strollers. And that's 24,000 miles in all 50 states. And so in our area, VEPCO is a Virginia Electric Power Company, which is now Dominion Energy, cooperated with the financing with the Northern Virginia Park Authority to create what became, I think it's 45 miles of paths that cut through Arlington. You can go all the way out to Mount Vernon, and you can go southwest all the way to Loudoun County, Purcellville. And this sort of later would be much more appreciated by Arlington when they began the car-free diet, which is around 2010, and Bike Arlington. Bike Arlington is an issue by the county. It was in the strategic plan, I guess, in 2008. But by 2010, they had a program of encouraging more commuting by bicycle. And they more recently have joined Capital Bike Share, which allows you to borrow bikes using an app and returning them almost wherever you like at another location. And I've mentioned this in my column recently that the Metro system has now set up 3 caged bicycle storage facilities that people who ride Metro just can use their Metro Pass to store their bike in there, and it's safer, I guess, than the outdoor bike racks. But because of the pandemic, it's so sad that the Metro, of course, is suffering from low ridership. But the East Falls Church cage, where I've seen it, is deserted, and an Inspector General's report came out showing that those cages, there's 3 of them, cost $19,400 per slot. That's for one bike, total of $5.9 million. So it's a shame that is going to waste. All right, in 1999, Arlington joined other communities in setting up its own bus service, which operates on the cross streets from opposite the WMATA buses and penetrates the residential neighborhoods more. And I was interested in, when I see the art buses, and I've ridden them, you can use your Metro Pass. When I've ridden them, they're almost always empty. And so I was looking at the ridership, and of course during the pandemic, which is, it's not fair to judge them by that, but the pandemic, they have been cut in half. It's from over 500,000 riders per year to 250,000. But the latest report is from August, and it shows that they have about an 85% on-time rate. They're getting about 86,000 riders per month. And the most popular line is the Columbia Pike to Ballston to Courthouse, which got 33,000 riders in the August report. The Lee Highway to East Falls Church and Rosslyn got 11,000. Okay, so this is a photoshopped imaginary version of the Columbia Pike streetcar that, as you all know, was never built. In 2012, the county board first approved a plan for a streetcar on Columbia Pike. You know, it is the most heavily trafficked commuter road in Virginia, and there's a lot of people, merchants on the Pike, that were also very interested in having a way for people who are locals to just hop on a trolley and just go 6 or 7 blocks and get out and patronize their businesses. You also had interest from Fairfax County, people who live or work in the Skyline Towers of Bailey's Crossroad area, which is where the terminus of the Columbia Pike streetcar line would end. And it was, of course, as you all remember, it was fought over. The idea was to get more people out of their cars. And in 2014, I guess, you know, they pointed to success stories with streetcars in a lot of other cities like Portland, Oregon, Phoenix, Arizona. In May of 2014, a new study was done, and the county board was encouraged. It showed that the Columbia Pike corridor would gain 3.2 to 4.4 billion in development if the streetcar were built. And the opposition began to organize, and there was a group formed called the Arlingtonians for Sensible Transit that was against the streetcar. And they had plenty, and I interviewed some of these traffic engineers who were skeptical. They thought it might be disruptive and that it wouldn't lure people out of their cars. And I think that there was people in North Arlington who don't use the Columbia Pike as much. I think we're less interested in spending the money on it than maybe people in that area. So as maybe you all remember, is in November of 2014, John Weistat was elected to the school board, having run on a platform of opposing the streetcar, and Libby Garvey came over to that side as well. And so within a week, the chairman, Jay Fizzett, announced that they were canceling the streetcar. Now, in 2016, the county finally came up with an alternative plan, which was a premium bus service. And right now, I just updated myself today. It's taking the form of, they decided against dedicated lanes, which is one possible use of a way to do premium bus service. But they're building 23 modernized bus stops, and they don't cost $1 million. Oops, sorry, like the mythical, the famous one from 5 years ago. And I think I've been told that 8 of those 23 bus stops have been dug. The foundations have been dug, and the rest will be ready next spring. Now, look at that red top cab. Red Top has been in Arlington since 1964. The parent company is called Old Dominion Transportation. They work in Loudon, Fairfax, and Alexandria too. And of course, they were crushed and threatened by the arrival in around 2014 of the Uber and Lyft ride-sharing services, and which were unregulated. And you know, the criticisms of them is that they maybe they exploit their labor, and you know, maybe they're putting more cars on the road of drivers looking for fares. And there's some identity issues. Are they well marked? Do you understand that this is an Uber car that's picking you up? There's been assaults committed by people who get in the wrong car. And there's my personal bias was that I always like cab drivers who know the geography themselves. I took a lot of cabs before I retired downtown. And you know, of course, Uber and Lyft are very convenient. The big bone of contention in the early years was whether they were a software or a transportation service. And they claimed they were just a software and had no obligations to be regulated like a transportation service. And the Red Top and the other cab companies resisted this, of course, and but they in turn acquired their own apps, which you can get now. And you know, meanwhile, it's I personally still prefer a cab company where the driver is trained in the area geography. Another variation on this is car sharing. Arlington has had a similar arrangement, I think going back to about 2007 or 8, Zip Car, where if you don't want to rent a car overnight or for a week, you can borrow one, rent one for 2 or 3 hours for an errand. But it wasn't app based. And so this company called Free to Move, which is a conglomerate from, I think, based in Germany, they arrived just last year in Arlington, and they put a lot of Chevy Cruze and Equinox cars clearly marked in strategic places around the county, and you can just walk up and sign up and drive away with it, and you don't have to return it to the same place. And the concept of the free floating car has been welcomed by the county transportation planners, who consider it better for the environment and causing less traffic than Uber and Lyft. And you know, a lot of millennials are, unlike us baby boomers, maybe don't really want to own a car. So this is a good solution for them. All right, and then finally, this other app-based technology, the e-scooters, is arrived in 2019 as well, and this is worldwide. And of course, they are app-based. There was a dozen companies coming into Arlington, and they all had these quick one-syllable names, you know, Bird, Bolt, Jump, Lime, Lift, Skip, Spin. And they have chips in those vehicles so that the company always knows where they are. And when you subscribe with an app, you can just pick one up, and it costs an average ride is 1.4 miles, and it costs you about $3 to $4. And then you could just leave them wherever you like. Unlike the Free to Move car, you don't even have to find a docking station or a corral, they call it. You can just lie it down. And I find that a little bit of an eyesore. And then there was also some health and safety issues where there were collisions with people on scooters, and there was big questions about whether they should be allowed on sidewalks or in traffic. And Arlington finally decided that they would be allowed on sidewalks. All right, and then finally, my last 2 points had to do with fantasy transportation that has not occurred in our area. This is called, if you're looking at the artist's conception of a J-pod, and in 2015, a Minneapolis entrepreneur named Bill James came to Columbia Pike area and gave a talk proposing that the Pike be outfitted with this kind of huge trestle with these cable car type vehicles. And he had said it had been done with success in West Virginia and Morgantown, and was being considered in places like Ottawa and in China. And he promoted the idea that you have more privacy in there. You know, you can get in a car with just you and your family or your friends instead of being mixed with all the strangers like you would in a bus or on metro. It got a mixed reaction from the good citizens of the Columbia Heights Civic Association, who were concerned that it was kind of an eyesore. And then finally, this is the artist's conception of the gondola that a group of business people in the Georgetown area proposed for, again, west of Key Bridge. And it would, let's see, they thought it would cost $80 to $90 million with annual operating costs of $3.25 million, but it would attract 6,500 riders a day and 2,400 per hour in each direction. And it was, you know, it would alter the landscape of our hometown, kind of like the way the Eiffel Tower altered the landscape of Paris back in the 19th century. Anyway, it was considered. I don't think it's totally dead, but in February of 2017, Chairman Jay Fazette. He's kind of the grim reaper of transportation modes. Announced that the gondola was not really in Arlington's future. So, all right, and those are some of my sources, which I appreciate, books and online publications that would help me prepare this talk. And I am now ready to take not only questions, I'm happy to take questions, but if you have anecdotes or just stories you want to share, that's fine too. So please proceed.
Yeah, Charlie, there was one question from one person. It seems to me there was a different bus service in Arlington, not part of DC Transit. One had to transfer at Rosslyn Circle. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was a lot of transferring in Rosslyn Circle. You know, I have to admit that I got contradictory readings on that because they were, like I say, these are all privately owned before WMATA took over and sort of made it more regional. So, but there was plenty of people in the 60s, the dads that I knew, who would get on the bus at Lee Highway and just take it all the way down to Farragut Square. And so I assume that was DC Transit. Anybody else?
Yeah, the other way, didn't Arlington County follow up the routing of Metro Rail with a tax break for developers who built within 1 mile of the new Metro route, spurring development, Rosslyn, Clarendon, and Courthouse, Boston? That's a long question.
Well, I'd have to research the tax incentives. The thing is that they did get access, first bidding rights on a lot of that land that's so proximate to the Metro, and it's the design. The concept is what they call the wedding cake, where the higher buildings are closest to the Metro stops, and then the buildings get progressively shorter as you fades back into the residential neighborhoods. So there was some planning and control over that may have been affected by tax policy, but I'm not familiar with it enough to really answer that from a policy point of view.
Hey, Terry, we have some people that have raised their hands, so maybe we just go back and forth between raised hand and questions, if that's works for you.
Sure.
Okay, so we have one from LK or IK, so I'm going to allow you to talk, and if you can unmute and go ahead and speak.
I'm sorry, that was a mistake. I must have hit a wrong button. I have no question. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. And how about, let's see, Mike Hara? And I've just unmuted you, so you can go ahead and speak if you're ready. Unmute yourself too.
Yeah, no, I was the one that said that we couldn't see the pictures at all. In fact, if you could go back and show some of those pictures at the very beginning, that would be great, because we missed all of that first part.
Okay, let's see what I can do. Let's see.
In the meantime, see if we can get an actual person that has a question. So Jim Ring, I'm going to allow you to talk. If you can unmute yourself and go ahead and speak.
Okay, yeah, this is Jim Ring. In 1967, I was stationed actually just above the Pentagon at the Navy Annex. And I remember a mixing bowl at the intersection of what it was Shirley Highway at the time, not 395, and Washington Boulevard. I seem to recall there were like stop signs at that intersection or yield signs. And finally they changed the whole thing that looks like it is today. Do you remember anything about that?
I do. In 1971 and 2, I worked for a moving company, Newlands Transfer, and we would drive down south on 95 almost every day to go to places like Springfield, Franconia, and on the way back every night there was all this construction going on, and underneath the trestles that take 395 into town, was a new underpass that took you up to Washington Boulevard, and we drove over that any number of times. So I would guess that was done in like 71 through 73 or 4.
It was really a mess
Yeah.
in the morning, you know, people trying to get into DC. And I can't remember whether it was stop sign, but I don't remember any kind of a stop lights there to try to control the, it was
Yeah,
kind
I,
of like
I suspect it was dangerous.
it was like bumper cars trying to get in there.
Okay, Terry, if you want to maybe do a couple questions. Looks like we've
Yeah,
got quite a few.
yeah. From one, why is the orange line in Arlington so successful, as opposed to the blue and yellow lines? Do you know that?
Well, that's a tough question.
That's a hard. Yeah,
I mean, I think that the blue line people have had the roughest time in the last couple of years. They had the suspended stations for construction improvements. And the orange line now, of course, has the advantage of being parallel with the silver line. And I don't know what I did to deserve this, but living in East Falls Church, I would have a choice when I was downtown of taking either the silver line or the orange line. You know, it's the airport and is a huge draw for the blue line. And so I'm not sure, just understand exactly why the yellow line maybe is a little more complicated, going from Longfellow Plaza through the Pentagon. But you know, you'd have to ask somebody who really studies the metro patterns.
what was the source of the name for, why was the Three Sister Bridge called the Three Sister Bridge?
That's a very good question. I meant to say that too. It's a Native American tradition that there's a rock formation in the middle of the Potomac that's been called the Three Sisters, and it shows up on early maps too. So that's why the bridge was named that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, what did somebody brought up? We're calling Julius Hobson. What does Julius Hobson have to have the Three Sister Bridge, or do you know that? Or
well, he was let's see, he's a DC based civil rights leader and politician. I can't remember his exact title, but he may have been one of the representatives of the African American community that was against the Three Sisters Bridge because they thought it would require too much construction and condemnation of properties in their neighborhoods.
yeah, why would, and the okay, yeah, concerning the street redo in the 30s, what was the rationale for numbered roads being streets, roads, place? Like 25th Road, and then there's North, and 25th Street North, and 25th Place North.
Well,
I've seen that.
yeah. I did a column on the crazy leftover stubs that didn't quite fit into the grid there. I mean, look, the topography prevented a totally logical map, but the idea was that Arlington Boulevard, Route 50, which was called Lee Boulevard in the 20s onward, and it changed to Arlington Boulevard in the early 50s, would be the divider between North and South Arlington. And that will allow you to start the numbering system over again. And then you tried to keep the 1 and 2 and 3 syllable names consistent across the county, but there's plenty of interruptions, as you know.
Right.
So,
yeah.
But Charlie, well, why is there a 25th Street and a 25th Road?
well, because it allowed them to keep the surrounding numbers consistent. You know, if you needed, it's like a placeholder. You know, and it's very confusing to postmen and dinner guests to say you show up at 25th Road when you really want 25th Street. But that allowed them that the 26th or 28th Street would stay the same and be more parallel with the rest of the county if they could throw in a road.
Okay, well, we've got some raised hands, so why don't we switch over to that, and then we'll come back to the questions in the Q&A. So let's see, Barb Spangler, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, this is actually Steve Spangler, but
Oh, okay.
one of the anecdotes I heard back in the 80s when I lived in the Wyckoff Woodlawn was that people were so upset about changing the names of the streets, and so they were no longer living on the street they grew up on, that after the name change, they voted the county council out of office. I don't know. But my question is, you showed beautiful pictures of Glebe Road as a 4-lane road, but then once it gets near Chain Bridge, it goes down to a narrow country.
Yes.
And people at least once a month slam into the guardrail and similarly, when Chain Bridge Road comes down, once it gets inside Arlington, it goes to a narrow country road. Has they ever thought of expanding that to 4 lanes all the way to the bridge?
Well, that's a very good question. In fact, if you want to walk down to Chain Bridge, if you want to visit, for example, the historic sign there where they talk about the founding documents of the United States that were stored under that bridge briefly during the War of 1812 to protect them from the British, there's a sign there explaining all that, and there's hiking paths. But if you want to get to it, you have to know that you go into the Arlingwood Randolph Street, and there's a proper path to walk down to Chain Bridge. If you try and walk down to Chain Bridge on that 2-lane road, which I did once, you're taking your life in your hands. And as for the Chain Bridge Road going towards McLean, which it only has a couple of blocks in Arlington, I imagine that those are pretty wealthy property owners there, and I imagine that they would resist the construction and the confiscation of slices of their land. I could be wrong, but.
Okay, great. We've got Susan, I'm unmuting you, so unmute your mic and go ahead and speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, we sure can.
Okay, just a quick story. I interviewed a gentleman who lived across the street from us. We're on 6th Street between Kensington and Jefferson Street. Mr. Stagmeyer, on the day that we had the huge storm in January, late January 1922, was living in his house across the street from us. And he had to take out with a big shopping basket and walk in this deep snow from the house down to, you mentioned the name of the junction, I think, the one closest to Ballston.
Yeah, Bluemont Junction.
Bluemont Junction, and that was at Ballston, right?
Well, it's down Wilson Boulevard from Ballston.
Right, okay. So he had to walk down there because he had to take the trolley from there into Georgetown to buy food, you know, to bring back. And when he came back, when he arrived back at the trolley stop, Sheriff John Ball was there on horseback.
Wow.
And he asked him if he would take him home from Ballston to 6th Street. And he refused. And Mr. Stagmeyer said, I never forgave that man for that.
Wow.
It was just a little story.
I love that story. Thank you.
Okay, Terry, you want to knock out some more questions out of the Q&A?
Yeah, what marked the line between North and South Arlington before the 50 was built, before Route 50 was built? Was there a line?
I don't think there really was. I mean, Arlington used to be in 3 districts. You know, it had a Washington district, an Arlington district, and a Mount Vernon district. The Mount Vernon one was closest to Alexandria. And that all changed in 1920 when Arlington took its own name and it was no longer part of Alexandria County.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, just a comment that the number of people thought the Kevin Costner movie in Georgetown was No Way Out. That was the title.
Thank you very much. Yeah. I had a senior
Number of
moment
people
there.
voted.
Yeah.
That was okay.
Yeah.
So did I. And yeah, one person is curious of why the art bus doesn't run straight down Wilson from Rosslyn to Bailey's. Why didn't it go all the way?
Oh, wow.
Okay.
That's above my pay grade too. Sorry.
Just a yeah. Has the metro affected the number of cars in Arlington? I would think
Well,
so.
yeah, it's hard to know because people build their whole lifestyles around, moving into high rises near metro and walking distance to metro. So I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but I think you can count on it. It's the people who live way out in Fairfax and Loudoun that really want I-66 and want more car access. And I just remember that we bought our house in Arlington in 1993. I mean, I grew up here, but I was away in Alexandria, and then we came back in 93. And we're near metro, and it was absolutely not a premium at the time in the 90s. It took a while for metro to catch on. And I think traffic increased in the late 90s out in places like Burke and Vienna and Oakton. And that's when suddenly people started to think that houses closer in Arlington would ease our commute, and that's when the prices started to go up more in Arlington. So.
And somebody mentioned that was the Three Sisters Bridge was the construction ever started?
No.
No, it never. She said,
No.
Someone says she thought Hurricane Agnes maybe have washed the early work away, and.
Boy, I hadn't heard that. Hurricane Agnes was 1972. I remember that well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've got some raised hands. Why don't I move over to that?
Yeah, well, we do move. Yeah.
Bob Love, I'm allowing you to speak. Unmute yourself, and you're on.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we sure can.
Charlie, I remember coming up to DC and staying in a motel on the river. I think it was the river side of the Pentagon. And it may be somewhere close to the site of that Long Branch Park, or not Long Branch Park.
Yes. Aquatic Center. Yeah.
And it was torn down. I think there was I don't know who owned the motel, but there may have been a hot shops out there or something.
Yeah. So that was the Twin Bridges Marriott. And the Twin Bridges Marriott was actually the first motor hotel, the Marriott chain. And it was right where the 14th Street Bridge hits Virginia now. And we had our high school prom there in Yorktown High School in 1971. And the rock musician from the band Little Feat called Lowell George, he died in that Twin Bridges motel, some kind of drug issue in late 70s. And so I can't remember the exact year it was torn down, but I think early 80s. And
is that where the new park is, or?
Well, it's the other side of the 395, but that whole cloverleaf entrances to the bridges where it intersects with Route 1 and the GW Parkway was all redone, and they got rid of the Marriott Hotel.
Well, it was pretty fancy. I remember that.
They had a ice skating rink there too. People remember that.
Okay, let's go to Derek. I've opened up your mic. You need to make sure you're unmuted and so you can speak.
Thank you. Just a quick question on history. Thank you for a great presentation, Charlie. You had mentioned early, actually late 19th century railroad magnates by the name of Elkins and McLean. And I was wondering if they are responsible for the name of McLean in Northern Virginia and the city of Elkins in West Virginia. You said he was a West Virginia congressman.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, in both cases.
Named after the railroad magnates?
Well, they were known for other things too, so it's hard to, I don't know if the railroad was really the central part of their legacy. I mean, they were both You know, it's the Hope Diamond family in McLean, and he sold the Dying Washington Post in the 1930s to the Graham family, and so there was a lot of the Meyer family, I should say, and then the Graham family married into it, the Post. Elkins has a complicated history too. He got in some legal scandals, and he was, I mean, it seems like they just had a lot of money to burn, and that's why they invested. Who knows how much active planning they actually did. There's a good book on the railroads that I used for this presentation that the authors are in my sources slide to it. I can get it to you if you need it.
Thank you.
Okay, Eileen, you're clear for takeoff. Unmute yourself and fire away.
Thank you. So my vote for the worst designed location in Arlington in terms of transportation is the traffic circle at the end of the Arlington Memorial Bridge. Do you have a favorite and a worst design for transportation in Arlington?
Well, that would be on my list too, because I've gotten caught on that circle several times and not able to get off. Let's think. Well, the gentleman earlier mentioned the intersection of 95 and Washington Boulevard back when it was being under construction. That was quite a dangerous area. Trying to think of where there's been a lot of accidents. Seven Corners, you know, that circle at Wilson Boulevard and Route 50 and Route 7, that is a big mess to go around. They're trying to do something new with that, but I don't know if it's gotten off the drawing board.
I agree with you on that one. Thanks.
Okay, and we've got Jack. So I've opened you up. Unmute your mic and give us your question.
Okay, I actually had a couple. One, it seems to me that Arlington has more should I say it, streets that are interrupted, like there'll be 6 blocks of a street and it disappears, and a mile away someplace it starts again. Is there a particular reason why Arlington ended up with more of those than common?
Well, it's funny. I've mentioned this in my column too. They wanted to keep consistent, and so, for example, over by Williamsburg Middle School, there's a little slice called Lancaster Street, but it's about 100 feet long, 150 feet at the most. So you wonder, why is it even there? There's only 2 houses on it, you know, but it continues, you know, 8 or 10 blocks later on the other side of Lee Highway, you know. So if you look in Crystal City along South Glebe Road, there's a whole row of streets, Ives and High and Grant. And those are all extensions of streets that I think under the old map used to be much longer, and now they're just little stubs. But they're trying to keep it, you know, so that it's an imaginary grid, but of course is interrupted by lots of topography and by commercial installations. Was that a second question you had?
Well, actually, I was going to just mention, my memory is on the Three Sisters Bridge. The idea was that it would connect with 66, then it would go to the Whitehurst Freeway, and then it would go all the way across DC, a new freeway. And that's why Julius Hobson, who was
very good
a Canadian activist, and he's really usually credited with the guy who put the final nail in the coffin.
Oh, well, that's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're right. It would. I mean, there weren't that many African-American neighborhoods in Georgetown proper, so it would have been further along
Exactly.
an imaginary freeway. You're exactly right.
Yeah. And then the other interesting thing to me about that is that when that wasn't built, I-66 was built anyway and funneled all the traffic onto the Roosevelt Bridge.
Right. Well, you've heard of this concept called induced demand, which is a traffic planner's term. And if you build it, they will come. So that's why a lot of people, this is coming, they're talking about the Purple Line in Maryland, where they had this recent crisis. They may have negotiated their way out of it. And all the, you know, the Techway, remember that was a proposal about 10 years ago to put another bridge over the Potomac between the Dulles corridor and the 270 Tech corridor in Maryland. And, you know, to ease some of the heavy traffic on the American Legion Bridge. and that didn't go anywhere either. It would require burrowing through a lot of natural woods too. But you know, the people who were environmentally inclined argue that the more you widen roads to ease the impatience of car drivers, the more people will get in their cars, and it's just a perpetual motion of without easing the traffic. I have to do some research, but it seems to me that the dynamic tolling on I-66, besides raising some revenue for the state of Virginia, has helped. I mean, it's hard to know because of the pandemic, but it seems like the traffic jams on I-66 have eased in the last couple of years. That's my perception, but I'm a Metro guy, so it's hard to know.
Okay, great. I think we've got some questions rolling in, but I will add that I don't know if it's an urban myth or not, but supposedly the final exam for FedEx drivers is to see if they can deliver packages in Arlington, all those non-contiguous streets. I don't know if that's true or not.
I'll ask.
Yeah, check that out. Anyway, Terry, you got some more questions you want to?
Yeah, I think I got maybe a couple, maybe one more. Can you address the I-66 development? It seems that there was this one participant was told that there was a plan to not have any exits or in Arlington off of I-66, and that there was a committee of 100 was formed to change that. I mean, was there ever a plan not to have any exits or entrances?
Well, I'd like to know about that. You know, the committee of 100 is an ongoing debating club that started in 1954. So I don't know if that's related to the committee you're talking about. But it was the Arlington Committee on Transportation were the opponents of I-66. Coalition on Transportation, and Jim and Amelia Goman. I'd have to look up, you know, they did an oral history, which you can find at the Arlington Central Library once the pandemic ends. I hadn't heard about the notion of having no stops in Arlington. It seems a little too subservient to the Fairfaxians and Prince William commuters. I mean, Arlington has always wanted to have employment, and not every, and even federal agencies have been in Arlington. So it's not like everybody wants to go downtown without stopping in Arlington. You know, I remember an op-ed that was published back in the 80s by somebody saying that he was really disgusted with I-66. I think he'd been away and moved back, and he said that Arlington's a nice place to commute through, but I wouldn't want to live there anymore. And I remember that was kind of shouted down by other people, that many of us are perfectly happy to live in Arlington. And some of the people who protested I-66 admit that eventually they came to accept it and use it. So it's really, and of course now they've done it much better. By the way, I have a good trivia question for some of you. Do you know what the official name for I-66 is in the Arlington section? And the answer is the Custis Memorial Highway. And what's interesting is that it was not named for George Washington Parke Custis, who built Arlington House, but it's for his sister, Nellie Custis. And the bike path that hugs I-66 is called the Custis Trail for the same reason. So.
Yeah, I've seen some signs that point towards, 66, that was, the Nellie Custis, in the road. But was there ever a plan? I get the impression there was never a plan for naming the streets in Arlington. I mean, initially, it's like there was farms and there were streets, and
right.
And
See,
as developers bought farms and they named the streets or whatever.
Well, here's the thing: you could nominate names for your street, you know, Arlington was the rural part of Alexandria County from 1791 on through 1920. So the roads, you know, Lee Highway was called, you know, the Georgetown Fairfax Road, or Wilson Boulevard, or it was you know, the Georgetown Falls Church Road or something, and you had Alexandria in the names of a lot of these roads, and they were kind of informal. So when they imposed a street grid in the early 1930s, they did take suggestions from people, and In fact, they had a procedure at the end of it. If you weren't happy with what your street had been named, then you could form a petition to change it, but you had to pay for the costs.
But Charlie, aren't the streets named alphabetically as they move away from DC? At least the named streets?
Yeah, you got one syllable and then the group of 2 syllable and then the group of 3 syllables. And there's one exception. There's one 4-syllable name in that grid. It's right at the Falls Church border off of Williamsburg Boulevard. It's Arizona Street.
So when did that come into effect?
Well, that grid was about 1935. It took them 3 years to plan it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Terry, you got some more questions?
Oh, well, wait a second. Was Nellie Custis an enslaver? That's the street. Was Nellie Custis an enslaver?
Yes, she was.
Oh, she was. Okay.
In fact, you know, just for the background for people, Nellie Custis grew up with George Washington Parke Custis at Mount Vernon. They were raised by their grandmother, Martha Washington. They were the children of her son from her first marriage. So George Washington, of course, was never had any natural children, but he raised John Parke Custis and his sister Martha Custis, and then he raised the grandchildren, George Washington Parke Custis and Nellie Custis, although they had 2 older sisters who were raised elsewhere, Eliza Parke Custis and Martha Parke Custis. So, but Nellie then, with her husband, Lawrence Lewis, built the Woodlawn Plantation after George Washington gave them the land. And she definitely owned slaves, and she also was a fierce defender of slavery. I've seen a letter from her written in the 1930s attacking the abolitionists. So, yeah, there's no doubt about that. There's some disagreement over the spelling of her name, by the way. It's always spelled by the people who knew her and in her letters, N-E-L-L-Y. But in some modern maps, and there was a school in Arlington where they was spelled N-E-L-L-I-E. So I did a line about that.
Yeah, I don't know if you know, one person asked the question, how was Joyce Street named? Well, what was Joyce Street named after?
Well, if you'll give me a second, I have a little pamphlet on why do they call it. And let me see if Joyce Street is in that. Okay.
Joyce Street, okay.
No, sorry, I'm in the J's. There's nothing for Joyce Street. That's interesting. Okay. We should try and find that out. You know, I just did an item about a year ago on Underwood Street, which is near my house at the intersection of Lee Highway. And, but they're about to rename Lee Highway, as you all know, to take Robert E. Lee's name off it. And Underwood was named for the judge who tried to prosecute Robert E. Lee after the Civil War for treason. It was unsuccessful, but so it's interesting that there's an intersection of Underwood and Lee Highway in Arlington.
And this is about the Three Sisters Bridge. Didn't Bob Head of Head Construction file a lawsuit over the cancellation of the Three Sisters Bridge?
Oh, well, you got me on that. Okay. You know, I'd have to look that up. Yeah, that's good to know, though.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have anything else, David?
Yeah. Well, we got a couple raised hands. Okay. So I don't know. Jim Ring. I don't think I think. Oh, asked to unmute. Have you got another question?
Yeah, I just a comment. You know, DC has the same street structure as you said Arlington has. So I imagine Arlington just picked it up from DC because DC, the streets, North Capitol and South Capitol, the streets to the right and left are first, second, third, and then going north and south, they're A, B, C, and then single syllable and double syllable. You know, so it's exactly.
I think that's correct. I think the article I read in the Arlington Historical Magazine about how it was written by the county official who presided over the process. I think he did mention that they took the pattern from the district.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Eileen, I guess you've got a second bite of the apple.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask about when Arlington got rid of the trolleys. I think I heard something about the bus companies paid the county board big time to try and get rid of the trolleys. Is any of that correct?
Well, again, I'd have to research that more. I did come across the trolleys were losing money by 1923. So the automobile just offered so much more freedom and individual style. So I don't know. I'd have to find out exactly who went after whom. But
okay, we got Sarah Linton. I'm opening up. Go ahead and unmute and fire your question away.
Yeah, it's Mark Linton. You've mentioned the dynamic pricing on Highway 66 seems to help traffic on 66, but I've always assumed that the main effect was simply to shift traffic off 66 onto especially Route 50 and other arteries through Arlington. I wonder if anybody's done any studies on the effects of the dynamic pricing on traffic in Arlington on other streets.
Yeah, that's a good question. And that was the accusation when they were introducing the dynamic tolling. And then a lot of the people in the residential neighborhoods, Lee Highway and Wilson Boulevard, they worried that people would just, and Glebe Road, 26th Street, other arteries that commuters might use. But the hope is that there'll be more carpooling and that more people will take Metro from the outer, they were introducing new parking lots at the same time in the West Falls Church and Vienna Metro to accommodate the people who were coming from points further out. That's a good question to find out after. It's been a couple of years now. I remember how shocked people were when it flashes you a digital readout on the current price when you approach I-66, and it's sometimes it says $45. If you were going to get on I-66 at 8 in the morning from East Falls Church, just to go down to K Street, you're going to spend $45. Well, of course, you may not get there very fast either, because the reason it's $45 is that they want to discourage you and that the traffic is at a standstill. By the way, one thing I could have mentioned earlier when I was talking about eminent domain and thoroughfares is that Sycamore Street, where the East Falls Church Metro is now, for decades did not go through. When I was a kid, I remember this in like 1962 or 3, that Sycamore Street would stop at Washington Boulevard, and then you had woods and a creek, and you had to come out on the other side by taking other side streets. And I think it's around 1964, I once checked this, that they plowed through the woods there and opened up a Sycamore to come through, so it hit Roosevelt Boulevard, which is a Falls Church Street, and now it's a clean link up, and you end up on Wilson Boulevard from after having been on Roosevelt Boulevard for a spell.
So we've gone the full hour and a half. We don't have any more raised hands. There may be, I don't know, Terry. Well, Charlie, can you stay on a few minutes? I think we may have a couple more.
Yeah,
questions.
I don't mind really. The questions I can't answer, I'm very interested in, and I'll make note of them too. I appreciate it. So.
Okay, Terry, if you've got some more questions, go ahead and fire away.
Wait a second. Somebody has off Patrick Henry Drive, the alphabet is mangled.
Yeah.
Was Englewood Street, 1 block long street, coming before Illinois. They are reversed on the south side of Patrick Henry near 16th Street. I guess it's.
That's a good little factoid. I'll make a note of it. Yeah. One of the in the column I did on the exceptions to the grid, I mean, one example is right near there. If you're on Wilson Boulevard and you get on McKinley Road, where the Rouse property is, it is under discussion right now about redeveloping it, and you head down McKinley, it suddenly, by McKinley School, it jags over and it instantly becomes Ohio Street. And then Ohio Street crosses I-66 and goes up into the North Arlington neighborhoods by Nottingham School, but that is one of the least elegant transition when McKinley becomes Ohio in a split second.
Okay. And what were the plans when they developed the roads to the airport? I mean, somebody asked about, what about the airport? So, yeah.
Well, one of the things you'll notice that Amazon, by setting up shop in Crystal City, is this impetus for a new access road to the airport to ease some of that traffic, a new bridge, even a pedestrian bridge over directly to the airport. And remember, the airport was redesigned in the late 90s. And so I think that's when they set up some of those lanes from Crystal City and the exits from the GW Parkway, that cell phone waiting area.
Yeah, that's true.
So that has been a work in progress since the 1920s, really. And well, listen, I've enjoyed it very much, folks. I appreciate your time on a pandemic rainy day. It was great to have you all to share some time with you.
Okay.
Thanks.